Bashar Jafari there, the Syrian ambassador to the UN. Well, with me now in the studio is Sakhr Al-Makhadhi, a British Arab journalist who's been covering the conflict in Syria. It's good to have you in. Thanks very much for joining us. We should have expected grandstanding from both sides today, staking out their positions, because, of course, they've got constituencies in their own countries, in their own country, that they have to refer to as well.
They do, and, you know, they've both come here to show how big they are, how well they're playing on the international stage. Neither side has come into this with sincerity to end the conflict, and I think that's the big problem. That's the reason that we've got such low expectations of these peace talks. The fact that we're saying, well, at least they're sitting in the same room together, although they may not when it comes to the closed-door negotiations on Friday. The fact that that's the best we can hope for really shows that there doesn't seem to be an end in sight to the Syrian conflict, not least from what's happening in Geneva.
There seems to be playing out a similar sort of scenario that we saw back in 1992 when the Palestinians and the Israelis met across the peace table there under the auspices of George H.W. Bush. Then, again, at the very beginning, there was a lot of mud being thrown across the table, a lot of accusations and a lot of anger filling the air. But when they did break into different negotiations along themes, so specific areas, achievement was made, there was progress made. Do you see a similar thing perhaps happening here now?
Well, you know, the Syrian opposition, the coalition which is representing the opposition at the peace talks, has explicitly referred to the Oslo negotiations back in the 90s, where the Israelis and Palestinians came together, promised big things, and more than 20 years later, the war in Palestine still continues, and the circumstances are potentially even worse than they were back then. And what the opposition in Syria has said is that they don't want that same kind of Oslo process that drags on for years and years and years and doesn't really achieve anything. I think, though, what you did mention about the smaller gains to be made, I think that's the best we can hope for. And Lakhdar Brahimi, the UN envoy to Syria today, in his press conference did mention that he had firm assurances from both sides that they are going to allow greater humanitarian access and to push forward local ceasefires. So I think these very, very small gains are the best that we can hope for once the negotiations do come to an end.
But what seems to be the central sticking point is the status of President Assad. The opposition have made it clear that no peace deal is going to be negotiated if he's still in power. The Syrian authorities have said, I'm sorry, but he's got to be there at the end of this whole process. The Iranians, who are very important players in this war, they were rejected a seat at the table because they made it clear they believe that President Assad should stay in power. All the other discussions that have to take place, are they going to founder on this very central issue?
Well, they absolutely will. You know, the opposition has bet the farm on Assad leaving. They have said that our point number one, the basis for our existence is the removal of President Bashar al-Assad. And the Syrian regime delegation, which is in Geneva, has said the exact opposite. They are here not to transfer power to anyone. That President Bashar al-Assad will still be in power at the end of these negotiations. So they're fighting over two very different things. They're talking over each other's heads. And Iran is a key player in this. The fact that they were disinvited bodes very, very badly for these peace talks. The fact that they are not part of these peace talks when they hold the keys to controlling Bashar al-Assad's regime, and also the fact that on the other side the Islamist militants are also not at the negotiating table, means that even in some fantasy situation where Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian coalition were to come to some kind of agreement, that still wouldn't end the war, because there is a much bigger war going on in Syria.
Indeed, it does seem pretty fundamental, doesn't it, that you don't have these two sides in Montreux actually representing the constituencies who are fighting on the ground, not to any great extent anyway. Okay, Sakhr Al-Makhadhi, it's great to have you, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.